share with us, what are some of those differences and introduce us to the Unified Mindfulness system?
Sure. Gosh, a lot in there. I guess I'll start by saying that, this system was designed by a guy named Shinzen Young, the system I teach, Unified Mindfulness. And a simple way to think about it is that whenever you practice meditation, whatever style of meditation you practice, you're developing attention. You're developing skillful attention. And Shinzen has put that front and center, the skill development, and he has clarified what the skills are. There's 3 essential skills that you develop when you practice any kind of meditation. And when you put the skills front and center, that means you can be practicing anytime, anywhere. This skills-based approach is really his kind of legacy, what he has contributed to the field of meditation. And it offers a lot of advantages to the user. It's very empowering to the individual to understand that they're developing a set of skills and what those skills are and how to develop them. It's also really lends itself to research, scientific research, and he has worked with some of the top researchers in the field, and they've gotten some really interesting results as a result of how he has designed his approach. So I thought I'd start there so people understand what we're talking about when we go into kind of the more personal stuff.
Yeah, I think it's great because what I really love about everything that you and Shinzen and the whole community you guys have built is that it is the utmost practical thing. I mean, that's been one of the biggest things that we've talked about in our conversation, our coaching calls, is the practicality of it, because it's not just going off onto a mountain and sitting on a rock and transcend. Although that may be a part of it, and although you may go sit on a rock, there is much more that you can do on a day-to-day basis, and it really lends itself to solving real life problems. So can you take us through the journey of how you ended up and finding meditation and mindfulness and how it became a tool for you?
Totally, yeah. So I was, as you mentioned, I was a professional singer-songwriter, and I had some real highs and I had some real lows. I, at one time, was on Warner Brothers as a solo artist. I was recorded by Jeff Lynne and produced by Jeff Lynne. And then I was on BMG and Chrysalis. And so I actually, I got to tour opening for Don Henley. I had some real highlights in my professional life. But also a lot of lowlights. I had a lot of, space in between the success and, really struggling to make a living, and a lot of blows to the ego, right? So a lot of ego boosts and a lot of ego blows. And I, as it happens, as most people, most artists are already sensitive creatures. And I was certainly a very delicate flower emotionally. And really struggled profoundly with anxiety and depression. And I was at a loss for how to deal with it. I was in therapy. I tried medication. Nothing was really doing the job for me. And it was helping for sure. But I could see that something else needed to happen, or my life was just going to kind of slowly but surely move into decline over the years. I could see that was what was in store for me. And I didn't know what to do about it. And I was in therapy after so I got a record deal on Warner Brothers. I made this record, and, there was it held a lot of promise, a lot of great press, and then it didn't go anywhere. And then I was waitressing again, and I started to crash emotionally, and I was in therapy, and the therapist suggested, why don't you try meditating? And I was totally skeptical. I thought it was a bunch of BS. It was really not my scene, but I was totally desperate also. And so I started practicing, and I understood, okay, I probably have to really give this a try to see any results. It's not going to come right away. So I gave myself 3 months at half an hour a day to test it out. I thought, I'm going to check back in after 3 months and see where I'm at with it. So I practiced for 3 months straight for half an hour a day. And by the end of it, which is a pretty big commitment, yeah. So Carolyn, I can see your eyebrows raising there. So I made that commitment because I thought I'm just going to give it like my full on effort here, and then I'll reassess. And by the end of those 3 months, I thought, I like what this is doing. I'm not sure what it's doing actually, but it seems as though I'm having some psychological insight, which meant a lot to me. That was important. And I feel a bit more grounded. There's something like, seems to be somewhat stabilizing about it. I like it. I'm going to keep doing it. And so I did. For 2 years, I practiced on my own with no instruction. And, one of the reasons I'm motivated to be a teacher is I want to compress the learning curve with people. I don't want people to be left to their own devices for 2 years, like I was, just kind of lost in the woods trying to hack my way through, not really knowing what I was doing and missing a lot of opportunities as a result. But during that time, like I said, I was trying medication as well. That wasn't really helping, was making matters worse. Finally, I started to have some experiences 2 years in that I didn't understand. And at that point, I thought, I need a teacher, but if it's anyone that sounds hippy-dippy at all, I'm out of here. I don't want that. So I had heard about, I got introduced to Shinzen Young, his work, and I went on my first retreat with him, and that's when my mind was totally blown, because I just did practice solidly. You get up on a retreat, you get up at sometimes as early as 3 in the morning, actually. On his retreats, you get up at 5 in the morning, and you're practicing until 10 at night. So it's a long day. But, it builds up. It's like a marathon, and the momentum builds up. And so, that was the first time I got to see the true potential of meditation practice, of a mindfulness practice. I practiced those skills that I described earlier. I practiced them over and over again, and I was dropped into a state, or what you mentioned earlier, a transcendent state. And I, at that moment, saw, it was wonderful. At that moment, I thought, well, if I just keep practicing these skills, then these states are going to happen more frequently. And my inner world is going to shift over time. I saw a way out of the way I ordinarily felt 24/7, which was basically miserable, chronically unhappy, chronically stressed out and depressed. I saw that I could train myself out of that. It was going to take a lot of work. It took a lot of work to get into it. 3 solid days of practice was not easy. But well worth it in the end, well worth it. So that was it for me. At that point, I was like, okay, I found my thing, and I committed to it. I got into deep immersive training, hours at a time. When I was not on retreat, then I'd go to retreat 4 times a year. And I just kept on up with that regimen. 3 years into my training, I started doing Zen practice, which was even more rigorous, more boot camp style. So I just went for the deep dive, and slowly but surely, I totally rewired my insides and discovered that in my case, that was what I needed to pull myself out of depression and anxiety. Everybody's different. Some people actually do respond well to medication. Some people need multiple interventions. So, no promises based on my experience, but I was fortunate that I found something that was a true and deep and lasting fix for myself.
Wow. And that is an amazing story. And what hope that you give for so many, especially those that truly are struggling. How inspiring. Now, I'm interested. You saw my face, and you probably know my question. You went deep. You went very deep. And the learnings that you brought out of that, and the transformation and transcendence that you experienced, where and how is it that you start? Because a half an hour a day, now that's a commitment. And what about those, and some people that are probably listening right now, they're thinking, half an hour, give me 5 minutes, Yeah. So how do we translate some of that? What do you have for us?
Yes, beautiful. Great question. So yes, like I said, that's what was available to me at that time. But, we've come a long way. Well, first of all, I highly recommend if you can do 10 minutes a day, that's the perfect place to start. Because honestly, the first phase of your practice, it's going to be pretty subtle. But what you want to do is establish the routine, establish the habit. Mm-hmm. So initially, what we're mainly talking about is positive behavior change. If you know that this is something you want to explore, the first biggest hurdle is, proving to your brain or convincing your brain that it's worth carving out any time at all for it, and getting your brain in the habit of, because we want to do what's comfortable and familiar to us, partially because from the mind's perspective, that is in one way more efficient, right? It's like, oh, if I just go into my routine, well then, that doesn't take as much energy as if I do this other thing, which I'm not used to doing. If I do this other thing I'm not used to doing, that takes extra energy, and I don't even know if it's worth the investment of time, right? So you can fall into lots of traps. And then if you add to that you don't quite understand what you're doing when you sit and meditate, which is a problem that Unified Mindfulness really tries to help people solve, giving them clarity about what they're doing so that confusion is eliminated from the mix. But let's say you have confusion about that and you're not sure whether you should commit the time, and your mind prefers to fall into its familiar grooves. That's really what you're working against in the early stage of practice. So the workaround is commit to a time you'll actually do. And most people can pull off 10 minutes. So let's say 10 minutes just to get you started. And you fall into that routine, and eventually it does seem weird if you don't do it. And that's what we want to get to, the point where your mind is like used to it, comfortable. Oh yes, this is the thing I do. I do this thing where I practice for 10 minutes. So that's one thing. Another thing is that this approach, Unified Mindfulness, once we take a skills-based approach, once we say, okay, there is a certain set of skills, well, then you're freed from having to do it while seated in silence with the eyes closed. There's an advantage, which is that when you're seated in silence with the eyes closed, there are less distractions, which makes it easier to notice subtleties in your experience. And Shinzen likes to say subtle is significant. So there's a kind of a key there if you can notice subtleties. However, when you understand how to practice in daily life, you can do it while you exercise, you can do it while you're eating, and suddenly now you've got your time back, which is so precious. And actually, you can have deep insights and deep practice experiences doing it while you're exercising, for instance. Mm-hmm. So it's very smart in terms of getting around the normal hurdles that we have of, gee, I don't have enough time, I hate sitting still, right? So we overcome those hurdles by saying, okay, 10 minutes, okay, do it in action, do it in exercise. So yeah. That's the answer to that.
And that's so amazing, because I know people, they're listening, their ears are perking up. Wait a minute, maybe I can do this during rush hour, and it brings me present.
Yes.
Whoa. Yeah. And think about the breakthroughs that people can have while they have a 30, 40-hour drive.
Exactly.
While they're sitting in traffic.
That's right. We have a technique. Of course, the only technique you should ever do when you're driving is what we call see, hear, feel, drive, because you don't want to be closing your eyes, right? You don't want to do anything to distract yourself. So what you do is you make the experience of driving the object of your focus. And so here's one thing you can think about. Usually when people learn meditation, or typically it's focus on your breath, right? That's a really common place that people are asked to focus their attention when they're practicing meditation. So, if your attention wanders, you bring it back to the breath, and there's that sort of basic instruction. The breath is what we'll call an object of focus, and it's an easy one. And it's, there's lots of interesting elements to the breath, like the fact that it's always moving is quite interesting. So there are certain features about the breath that may be interesting. But in any case, it is just one object of focus. And the reality is, again, when you have a skills-based approach, it's about the skill development. It's not about what you focus on. So that frees you up to focus on anything and everything, including driving the car. So now you're focusing on what you see on the road, you're focusing on what you hear on the road, you're focusing on the way it feels to hold the wheel, and you're bringing fuller attention to the activity of driving that makes you a safer driver, and you're developing the skills which lead to those outcomes that research has shown the benefits from practice.
Yes, that's gold.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Julianna, can you talk about unified mindfulness? Because I think a lot of people, what I really love about it is how, once again, the practicality of it. And so I don't know if I know it's evolved quite a bit, but I'm not sure if you would think of it as a progression, if you think of it as, modules, if you think of it as a toolkit, because what I think people often don't realize is that this skill set is probably one of the most foundational skill sets that can be applied to whatever, to relationships, to finances, to vision planning, to your wellness, to all of the things that we talk about here in One Life. It really develops that core, whatever you probably have a better way to say it, but that core ability to navigate your experiences. So how do you see the unified mindfulness system, and is it a progression or is it a toolkit, or like what are those kind of specific things out of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I often refer to it as a toolkit. I think that's a great way to describe it, because and it is modular, and it is, it's basically very adaptive to the individual. So each individual is going to come to meditation, mindfulness for different reasons. And basically what this approach does is it meets you in whatever your interest is in. Because if you, let's put it this way, generally lowering your stress is not going to really hold your interest for very long. But, you want to increase your close rate by, by getting more calls in and whatever, upping your percentage of sales calls and, making better connection with the people you're speaking to, just for instance. Okay, now that's something I can wrap my head around. Show me how to improve that. I'm down with it, right? So what's beautiful about this approach is a couple things. One is, as you pointed out, there are all these different situations, and you can get strategic about the situation, and you can apply a technique that's appropriate for the situation. You can learn a set of techniques that you personally like doing or find interesting or helpful, and that will develop your skills. And then you can apply those techniques in different situations depending on what you want to address. So there's that facet of it where it's very precise. A lot of times you'll hear, oh, you should be mindful throughout your day, but it's a kind of a general call to do that. Whereas Hector, from firsthand experience that actually with this approach, we're going to give you a set of options. You're going to try them out. You're going to see what works for you. And then you're going to have this reliable technique, this reliable strategy for addressing a particular issue. And if that strategy doesn't work for an issue, you're going to have all these other technique options that you can give a try to and see how they work. So it is a toolkit in that sense, that you get familiar with a bunch of techniques, a bunch of strategies at your pace, in your way, and you get greater facility with them. And then, you've got lots of options in a given situation, and maybe in one phase of your training life. So like there was a period where I had a lot of emotions coming up, and I knew how to work with my emotional experience. That was one phase of my practice where that was like that was the most prominent thing. So I worked with that, and then there was another phase where I loved focusing on eyes open, just seeing the world and focusing on what I was seeing in the environment. That became fascinating for me. So you can adapt to wherever your interest is at a given time over the course of, your relationship to this practice. And that keeps it interesting. And also different situations come up and you can apply it to those specific situations. So that's one thing to consider. The other is we have this happiness grid. So Shinzen, you know, what he did that was really unique is he basically, with his background, both in his experience with all types of practices, but also as a scholar of contemplative practice broadly, he sort of looked at all the major world traditions and he started to see, well, what are the ingredients of a meditation practice? What goes into a meditation practice? And he started to be able to, you know, he analyzed them into their component parts. And once you understand, once you think from that perspective, it takes the kind of confusion about it out of the equation. Like, well, am I supposed to do this technique or that technique? I'm not quite sure. When you understand, when you're able to analyze it, you can walk into any situation and make the most of a technique that you're offered. But so what he also did was he said, there are all sorts of things that people think about when they think about wanting to be happier. And he divided up, what is human happiness? What are all the ways human beings want to be happy? And let's categorize them, let's group them, let's organize them. And then let's think about this relationship. How does mindfulness practice relate to the way you particularly want to be happy? So there's these general categories: reduce suffering, increase fulfillment, behavior change, knowing yourself at a deeper level, making a greater contribution in the world, right? There are these sort of general categories that we think about. And then there are specifics, like maybe you're someone who is struggling with under the reduced suffering. Maybe you're saying to yourself, man, if I could just get out of this job, I'm in a terrible job, I hate it, I got to leave it, how can I get out of it? And for you want to reduce suffering by figuring an exit strategy out for leaving your job, let's say. Well, you come to us with that, and obviously there are limits. We can't get you another job, right? But what we can do is give you strategies to help with your decision making, and we can give you strategies to make the most while you're stuck in the job you're stuck in. And we can give you strategies that will help you create a space for considering where you want to go next, right? So there's lots of ways that mindfulness can be applied to a situation like that. And so part of what we look at is, okay, how do you want to be happier? Tell us how you want to be happier. And we're going to address it. And there are these kinds of ordinary ways that people think about being happier. Like I just described, I'll be happier when I have a different job. I'll be happier when I meet the love of my life. I'll be happier when I quit smoking, whatever it might be, right? But then there is also what we'll call extraordinary happiness. So there is that, and by that we mean it's not the ordinary way that people think about happiness. People ordinarily think about happiness in terms of the changes they want to make in their life. But there's also this thing that called extraordinary. We're calling it extraordinary happiness. That means happiness independent of conditions. So happiness that happens no matter what. Sometimes we find ourselves in really challenging situations that we cannot change. And so what then? And so being able to have a resource at moments like that, when you can't change your situation, being able to find happiness, to reduce suffering, to increase fulfillment, at moments like that, that's a profound gift to have. So for some people, they want to explore that side of the spectrum. Great, we can help you there too. So it's all about meeting you where your interest lies. What's going to matter to you? How do you want to be happier? Great, let's dive in and figure out some tools, some techniques and strategies to help you accomplish that.
That sounds amazing. Wow. Thank you. I truly appreciate your teachings, because I've used your teachings in my LEAF training.
Awesome.
And when I put on my very first event, and I thought, yes, okay, I want to be present I want to practice my mindfulness. What would Juliana say? And I made it through the entire event, being present. And what was so wonderful about it is that my event started and ended to the minute on time. Unheard of,
How
right?
beautiful.
And I credit that to your teaching in being present. I enjoyed the moment. I smelled, I felt, I looked around and just took in everything. And then it just kind of all fell into place.
That is awesome. Yeah, there's a kind of a magical synchronicity that can tend to happen when we are, in alignment with ourselves, when we're kind of an integrated person internally. Oftentimes that'll show up in the world in unique and interesting ways that there's a kind of like a harmony or a synchronicity that can often show up. So.
Yes. It makes it just, it's actually quite amazing the way that it works. And, some of those things, this is a thing where I feel it's like you have to let go and trust and then see, right? And so, yeah, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think the good news too is that you let go and you trust and you apply a practice, right? It's like, so it doesn't have to be untethered from any kind of, like Hector was saying, any kind of practicality. There's this great merging where what you've got to trust is your ability to just do these techniques and apply them. And so there's that kind of great balance of letting go and trusting and, applying that practice.
Yes, the practicality. I love it. And that's what speaks to, me and so many different people, that that practical piece, the piece that, okay, I can use this in my daily life. I don't have to buy a ticket to another side of the world and hide for 6 months. I can do this in my life every day. And it helps with, being a mom. It helps with being an entrepreneur. It helps with just, okay, in the middle of the day at 2:00 in the afternoon, I need to ground. And it's just practical.
Yeah. Well, and it's worth considering for people that we spend a lot of effort trying to achieve certain externals, which is all extremely valid and valuable, to have a certain lifestyle. I mean, if you think about it, you want a lifestyle where you're free to enjoy your family, right? I mean, that's a very meaningful goal. Just for instance, or you want a lifestyle where you're free to travel and do what's meaningful and important to you and what will give you a sense of enjoyment and fulfillment. So it's totally valid to pursue those types of objectives, but we often forget that while you're traveling, and living out the adventure, you're taking this mind and your body with you wherever you go. So if you spend too much energy on the externals, you may wake up one day to discover that, okay, you've got this life that you imagined for yourself, but the mind and body is miserable because you haven't done anything to care for it. I mean, that was my experience, right? I had a dream come true. I got a record deal on Warner Brothers. Like how much higher can it get for a singer-songwriter? And yet inside I was just miserable. And I think it was because I had I achieved such unusual heights that I actually got to see I got to see through that lie that we tell ourselves of, oh, well, if I just get that thing, then I'm going to start to feel okay. It's because I don't have that thing. That's why I'm not feeling so good. And we externalize our sense of fulfillment over and over again. And it's like, I sometimes think of it like a mirage, it's like you're in the desert and you're just, I just got to get to that oasis, and then you get there and it's like, it's just sand. Oh, no, wait, it's over there. Right. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And staying aligned with values. I love that. Being able to take that time and really practically use it and say, okay, is this aligned with my values? And can I take a moment and just really, even using the practice as a way to course correct as you're
Absolutely. That's right. Yes, because we can get into a drivenness and lose sight of our values and want to take shortcuts, for instance, that maybe aren't ethical, just for instance, right? So, and we get so hungry to see certain results that, we're so hungry to see certain results that there's a kind of a desperation that filters into our communication with people, and they pick up on that, So that's not serving your ultimate goal anyway. The greatest leverage you can have is to be able to walk away from the table, whatever deal is on the table, to know that you can walk away. And if you're too concerned about achieving certain externals, you're not going to be able to walk away so easily. But if you have it all together on the inside, then that's tremendous leverage in a negotiating setting.
Yes. Such good information. Thank you.
So, Julianna, I've had the unique pleasure of working with you very closely, and I know what's beautiful is that you've now scaled that to the nth degree, and you're doing some really cool things. And we talked about at the beginning. So share with us a little bit about this online retreat. I mean, you guys are doing some frankly unprecedented things that I think are really cool. So it's a 5-day event. It's online. It's free. It's for everybody. Well, for anybody who wants to get take to the next level. So talk to us a bit about the immersion event that's going on.
Yeah. So if people are curious based on what we've been sharing, and I love it's so fun that we all share this practice in common. That means a lot to me, actually. It makes it especially sweet, this conversation, just because, like you, I've gotten so much out of it, and so love to share it. And if people are interested, they can come to our event and get as they can dip their toes in, they can take a deep dive, and we'll be there to support them. And it's, like you said, it's a totally free event, and it is part summit and part retreat. So the way it works is, we've interviewed, we've got like 80 people that we've interviewed. And we've got some wonderful presenter interviews, people like the original happiness guru at Google. We've got New York Times bestselling authors. We've got, all kinds of Grammy-winning artists. So we've got all kinds of really wonderful people talking about their journey with meditation, how they got into it, where they came from. We've got neuroscience researchers in the field of mindfulness who, they're not just sharing with you what their research shows. They're talking about their personal journey, what led them to devote their entire life to this field. So it's deeply moving to hear these stories. So I find it really inspiring. And you see these threads, like these patterns emerge where you're hearing the same themes, but told from totally different points of view and different stories. So it's really fascinating, deeply motivating, and inspiring. And we're hoping that then inspires people who maybe don't have a lot of experience practicing, or maybe do in some other way or whatever, to come join us for the retreat. The retreat's going to happen at the same time. So it's April 10th through the 14th for 5 days, and it's 12 hours a day from 6 a.m. Pacific time to 6 p.m. Pacific time. You can come and join us for as much or as little as you want. There'll be meditation instruction, and there'll be silent periods and guidance periods. And then there'll also be, so one room will be, everybody will just be retreating together, sitting and practicing together for immersive training 12 hours a day. And then there'll be another room where, if you're interested in certain themes like workplace mindfulness, or practicing while you're eating, or exercise, there'll be another room where you can learn about those types of how to address those situations. So it's going to be, and basically you can do as much of it or as little of it as you want. But I think, yes, it's unprecedented. And what's cool too is we've got, our top Unified Mindfulness coaches that will be there during the retreat and in the life practice room, we're calling it the life practice, there to support you in your practice, however you need it, for 5 straight days, free. So it's a pretty awesome achievement for our community, and we're all extremely excited and proud.
This is really exciting for the community, and I encourage all of you guys to go get involved. It's free. The link is in the description. It's unifiedmindfulness.com/immersion, if I'm not mistaken, but the link is in the description. You'll get to hang out with Julianna, along with a bunch of other One Life regulars. I saw Hal, Elrod on the list, Roman, I'm rocking the front row shirt right now, and a few others that I recognize. So you guys got some time to register. Can they register now?
Yes, they can register now.
Cool. Carolyn, you got anything else for Julianna before we kind of wrap up and get some final thoughts from her?
I just want to say I want to register now. And and thank you so much for being here, Julianna. It's been wonderful. I just love your light, and I appreciate all that you're doing for so many people.
Likewise, this is so sweet. Yeah, I am looking forward to practicing more with you guys. It's just wonderful.
Well, go get involved, guys. The link is in the description. We have if you guys are catching this on the live stream, we have a One Life community call tomorrow. It's Women's History Month, so we're going to hear from 3 wildly successful women. Caroline will be featured on that as well. So tune in for that. And
yay, women! Sorry.
Absolutely. Make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast, like the Facebook page, go follow us on YouTube, all the things. And guys, we will see you on the next recording. Have a wonderful evening. Keep dreaming, planning, and living it. See ya.